My daughter-in-law tried to poison me at dinner, and my grandson switched the plates. That's not the kind of sentence a grandmother ever imagined saying out loud, but here I am, saying it anyway. My name is Margaret Ellis, and I'm 71 years old. I've lived long enough to know what betrayal feels like, but nothing prepares you for the taste of it on your tongue. The dining room that night still smells of rosemary and lemon butter. My son, Daniel, was talking about a new contract at work, his voice full of that distracted enthusiasm men get when they're proud but tired. Beside him sat his wife, Claire. Beautiful, composed Claire, with her pearl earrings catching the light and that soft smile that made strangers call her graceful. She reached for the ladle, her hands perfectly steady, and poured soup into my bowl. I remember her saying, "You'll like this, Mom. It's your favorite." Her voice was syrup smooth, just the right touch of care. I smiled back. But my grandson, Ethan, 12 years old and too observant for his age, didn't smile. His fork had stopped midair. His eyes were fixed on the bowl. And then, without a word, he reached across the table, awkwardly, urgently, and switched our plates. I frowned, ready to scold him for being impolite, but before I could, he whispered, barely audible, "Please, Grandma, just trust me." That's when I knew something was wrong. The kind of wrong that makes the air too thick to breathe. I didn't touch the food. And when Claire realized that, when she saw the uneaten bowl sitting before my grandson instead of me, something flickered behind her eyes. Just a flash, but enough. She knew the plan had failed, and I knew she had one. That was 3 hours ago. Now she's sitting across from me in this same dining room, her perfect hair unraveling, her lipstick smudged, and Daniel pacing near the window like a man trapped in someone else's nightmare. No one's saying a word. The police haven't been called. Not yet. Ethan's asleep upstairs. I made sure of that. He's just a child. He doesn't deserve to be in this storm. I never imagined that the woman I once called daughter could look at me the way Claire is looking now. Eyes cold, jaw set, a tremor running through her hands as she clutches her wine glass. I can tell she's thinking, how much does she know? The answer is simple. Enough. If you're wondering how I got here, how a quiet woman like me ended up staring across the table at someone who tried to end my life, you'll have to understand where it began. Because this isn't just about poison in a bowl. It's about years of quiet manipulation, about money, inheritance, and a kind of jealousy that hides behind politeness. But before I tell you that, let me show you this moment clearly. Claire's voice breaks the silence first. "Margaret, you're being dramatic. It was just soup." Her tone is brittle, defensive, like glass about to shatter. Daniel stops pacing. "What's going on here?" he demands, his eyes darting between us. I look at him, my son, the boy I raised alone after his father died, the one I worked double shifts for just so he could go to college without debt. And I see it, the confusion, the disbelief. He doesn't want to believe his wife could do something like this. "Daniel," I say quietly, "you might want to take Ethan to your sister's house tomorrow, just for a few days." He blinks. "Why would I?" "Because your wife tried to poison me tonight." There it is. The silence after truth hits the table like glass. For a moment, nobody moves. Then Claire laughs, that sharp, mocking laugh I've only heard once before, years ago, when she thought I couldn't hear her on the phone. "You're insane. You've always hated me. This is your way of getting rid of me, isn't it?" I don't answer her right away. I just reach into my cardigan pocket and pull out a small, folded paper, a lab report. I place it on the table, next to the untouched soup bowl. I had the broth tested yesterday. She freezes because she knows what's on that paper. When I caught her mixing something in the kitchen last night, a faint, sweet smell I'd never noticed before. I pretended not to see because I needed proof. So I took a spoonful after she left and drove it straight to a friend of mine at the pharmacy. He didn't believe me either until he saw the result. Claire's voice drops to a whisper. You, you went through my things? I almost smile. No, dear, I went through my instincts. That's the moment Daniel realizes it's real. He sinks into a chair, his face pale, his breathing uneven. Claire reaches for him, but he pulls away. It hurts, more than I care to admit, because for all her cruelty, she was still part of this family. I held her hand when she gave birth. I made her soup when she was sick. And tonight, she tried to end me. I can feel the room closing in around us, the ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the smell of the food gone cold. And in that moment, I realized something. This isn't just a betrayal. It's the end of an illusion I'd been clinging to. Because for years, I believed keeping peace meant keeping quiet. But silence only feeds the wolves. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and said, "You wanted the house, didn't you?" Her eyes flicker. There it is. The truth she thought she could bury under Sunday smiles and polite dinners. This house was always going to Daniel, but you wanted it sooner. That's why you forged my signature last month. That's why the deed transfer papers came from your office, not his. She doesn't deny it. She just stares. Cornered, furious, terrified. You don't know what you're talking about. You're old. You're losing your mind. I shake my head. Maybe, but not enough to miss the smell of almond in my soup. Brief pause. Quiet heartbreak. Daniel stands abruptly, pushing his chair back. I can't do this right now. He storms out, slamming the door, and the echo rattles through the walls like thunder. Claire exhales shakily, her voice trembling. You've ruined everything. No, I say softly. You did that yourself. That was the night everything shattered. The night I realized I couldn't protect my family by pretending nothing was wrong. And if you're listening to me now, wondering how a family dinner could turn into a battlefield, stay with me. Because what happened at that table didn't start there. It started months ago with a phone call that sounded harmless and a choice I thought was made out of love. But before I tell you that, remember this. When someone shows you who they are, even once, believe them. That night after Daniel left, I cleaned the table myself. The bowl sat there, untouched. The soup still golden, still beautiful under the light. I poured it down the sink and watched it swirl away, the smell of almonds fading with it. And as the water ran clear, I whispered to myself, "You'll regret underestimating me, Claire." Because I already knew what my next move would be, and she would never see it coming. That was the end of the dinner, but the beginning of my justice. It started months ago with a phone call that sounded harmless, the kind of call that begins with small talk and ends with something taken from you. I remember it was early spring. The garden smelled of wet earth and lilac. I had just finished pruning the rose bushes when the phone rang. The name on the screen, Claire, didn't worry me then. "Hi, Mom," she said brightly. Too bright. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. Daniel mentioned you were thinking of refinancing the house?" I frowned, wiping my hands on my apron. Refinancing? No, I wasn't. "Oh!" Her tone shifted. Quick, airy surprise. "Maybe I misunderstood. Daniel said you were reviewing your will, and I thought maybe the bank had called you." That's how she always did it. Planting a seed, pretending it was confusion, a small manipulation wrapped in kindness. I didn't think much of it at the time. I told her the truth, that my affairs were in order. that Daniel would inherit the house and Ethan would get the small savings I'd tucked away. She cooed like it was sweet. "You've always been so thoughtful, Margaret. Most people your age forget these things." That little sting in her compliment, it stayed with me longer than I care to admit. Later that week, Daniel came by. He had that distracted look again, the one that meant he was half listening. "Mom," he said, "Claire mentioned something about the house. Maybe it's time we put it in joint names, just in case something happens." I stared at him. "Just in case what happens?" He hesitated. "You know, health stuff. Paperwork can get messy." That's when I realized the subtle rewriting of what was mine into what could be shared. A few weeks later, a courier arrived with documents to sign. "Routine updates," the man said. I scanned them. Property title, mortgage review, tax adjustment, all printed neatly, all legitimate looking. Claire had highlighted the signature lines in pink with sticky notes that read, "Just here, Mom, easy." I should have called my solicitor, but I didn't. I signed. The paper smelled faintly of toner and lavender, her perfume. That was part one of her plan, though I didn't know it then. That summer, Claire insisted on hosting more dinners. "Family bonding," she said, but I could tell she wanted control of the house. She would arrange the table settings herself, instruct me where to sit, what to cook, even how to talk to Ethan. Once, when Ethan dropped his fork, she scolded him, sharp and cold. "We don't behave like animals here." I remember how his eyes filled with tears. I said gently, "He's just a child, Claire." She smiled thinly. "And you're spoiling him, Margaret." Later that night, Ethan crept into my room. He climbed onto the edge of the bed, whispering, "Grandma, why does Mom hate you?" My heart broke. I stroked his hair and said, "She doesn't, sweetheart. She just gets nervous sometimes." He shook his head. "No, she looks at you like she's mad." It was around that time Daniel started spending more nights at work. Claire began visiting me alone, often under the guise of helping. She would tidy drawers that didn't need tidying, ask for documents she shouldn't need. Once I found her in my study going through my filing cabinet. She jumped when I walked in. "Oh, I was just looking for that cookie recipe you mentioned." "Cookie recipe?" I repeated, eyeing the open folder, Bank Statements 2018-2023. Her smile didn't falter. "Yes, oatmeal chocolate chip." I didn't push it. Not yet. The first real fracture came one Thursday evening. I was making tea when Daniel called, his voice tense. "Mom, did you take money from the joint account?" "I don't have a joint account," I asked. There was a pause, long and loaded. "Claire said you must have forgotten." That's when I realized she'd already changed the paperwork I'd signed. My home. My home was now under a joint financial umbrella with her name attached. I hung up and sat in the quiet kitchen. The kettle clicked off, steam curling like a ghost. I thought of my late husband, William, how he'd built this house brick by brick after we married. His handwriting was still etched in the beams of the attic, little notes from a man who believed in permanence. The betrayal clawed at my chest, but I said nothing. Not yet. A week later, I found the second betrayal. Part two came wrapped in politeness, the same way snakes hide under flowers. The phone rang again. This time, it was the bank manager. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, "just confirming you'll be moving forward with the reverse mortgage process." My heart dropped. "What process?" He cleared his throat. "Your daughter-in-law, Claire Ellis, submitted the preliminary paperwork with your signature. She mentioned you'd discussed it." My signature. Again. I thanked him, hung up, and stared out the window. Outside, the neighbors' children were playing, their laughter sharp against the quiet. I envied their ignorance. That night, I pulled out every document Claire had touched. The pink sticky notes, the flowery "Love You Mom" scribbles at the bottom. I traced the signatures, mine and the one she'd copied. The loops were identical, almost perfect. Almost. There's something about age. People assume fragility means foolishness, but I wasn't foolish. I was observant. So I called an old friend, Helen Brooks, retired solicitor. She met me at a cafe the next morning, the smell of roasted beans, rain tapping the windows. "Show me," she said, adjusting her glasses. When she saw the papers, her face hardened. "She's been transferring equity, Margaret. Small portions, under the reporting threshold. Clever. How much?" I asked. £20,000 so far. Maybe more. I remember the clink of the teaspoon against her cup. It sounded like a verdict. Helen sighed. "You'll need to act fast, quietly. We can nullify this if we catch her filing early." I nodded, numb. That was the moment something inside me shifted from hurt to resolve. When I got home, I found Claire in the kitchen again, humming as she wiped the counter. She turned and smiled. "Oh, Mom, I picked up your prescriptions today. You should be careful. Mixing too many pills can be dangerous." Her words hung there, innocence on the surface, venom underneath. I looked her straight in the eye. "Thank you for caring, dear." She didn't see the steel in my voice. 2 days later came the third betrayal. Smaller, but crueler. Ethan came home from school with a drawing. It was a picture of our house, bright yellow with a garden full of tulips. Across the top, in uneven letters, he'd written, "Home, mine and Grandma's." Ethan looked at me confused. "But Grandma built it." She smiled. "People move on, darling." I wanted to shout, to tell her to stop poisoning his little world with her greed, but I swallowed the anger. I knew shouting would only feed her story, the one where I was the senile, bitter old woman. So, instead, I began to plan. I started documenting everything. I photographed documents, recorded conversations when she spoke about money, kept copies of every envelope that arrived. One evening, I accidentally left my phone recording on the kitchen table. Claire came in talking on her mobile. "Yes, once it's in my name, I'll sell it. Daniel doesn't need to know until after." My hand shook as I listened later. It wasn't shock anymore. It was clarity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the old clock ticking. Every sound felt louder. The creak of the floorboards, the faint hiss of the radiator. My heart beat steady and strong, like it had when I was younger and fearless. I thought of William again, of the promise I'd made to protect this home for Daniel and Ethan. I whispered to the empty room, "She won't win." But the cruelest part of all came not from Claire, but from Daniel. One Saturday morning, he showed up unannounced. He looked exhausted. "Mom," he said, rubbing his face, "Claire thinks you're not doing well. She's worried." I stiffened. "Not doing well?" She said, "You've been forgetful, paranoid. You accused her of taking money." My voice cracked. Not from weakness, but disbelief. "She forged my name, Daniel." He sighed, the way grown children sigh when they think they know better. "You don't have proof." That sentence burned through me like acid. "You don't have proof." That's when I realized I'd already lost him, at least for now. When he left that afternoon, Claire kissed him at the door and looked over his shoulder at me, smiling like a victor. "Take care of yourself, Mom. Don't forget your pills." Her words had an edge, one I would later recognize in the bitter taste of soup. That night, I stood in the kitchen alone. The moonlight spilled across the counter, catching the rim of the teacup I used. I thought of all the small humiliations, all the polite cruelties I'd swallowed for peace. I poured myself a drink. Not wine, just chamomile tea, and made a vow. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. But I wouldn't fight her with anger. I'd fight her with patience. From that moment on, every smile I gave her was a mask. Every "thank you, dear" a small act of camouflage, because I had started the quiet work of reclaiming my life, and she didn't suspect a thing. The next morning, Claire invited me to dinner. "I want to make peace," she said. "Let's start fresh." Her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. I smiled and agreed. That was the dinner where the soup was served, and where Ethan, my brave, beautiful grandson, switched the plates. But that night was only the visible part of a much larger battle. Because before the soup cooled, I'd already set my own plan in motion.
I believe these documents will prove my innocence.
The morning after Daniel switched the plates, I woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that hums before a storm. You can feel it in your bones. My son didn't come home that night. The police had found the car wrapped around a tree, about 10 miles outside town. They said he'd been drinking. I didn't cry, not because I didn't love him, but because I'd already lost him years before that crash. The moment he married Clara, he stopped being mine. When I reached the hospital, Clara was there, playing the perfect widow. Her mascara ran in practice streaks. Her voice cracked on cue. But what chilled me wasn't her act. It was that she was alive, standing in front of me, breathing, smiling faintly when she thought no one was looking. She didn't know Daniel had switched the plates, and so her poison had killed no one. Yet somehow, fate had done her job for her. After the funeral, the house became a battleground disguised as mourning. Clara moved through the rooms like a queen reclaiming her castle. She spoke to the guests with that false modesty, thanking them for their condolences, pretending to be shattered. But her eyes always darted to me. She wanted to see if I'd confront her. I didn't. I let her think I was broken. That's when she began to slip. Late one evening, I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low, urgent. "It didn't work, but it doesn't matter. He's gone now. I'll handle the will." The words "didn't work" burned themselves into my mind. The will. Of course. My son had named me the legal guardian of Daniel, his son, and given me co-ownership of the estate. Clara, by law, got the house, but the money, the accounts, and the land deeds were locked until Daniel turned 21. That's why she needed me gone. Over the next few weeks, Clara tried to turn Daniel against me. It was subtle at first, small lies, whispered suggestions. "Your grandmother doesn't trust me. She wants to keep everything for herself. If she had her way, we'd both be living like beggars." Daniel didn't believe her. He watched, listened, and stayed close to me. But I saw the weight of it starting to show on his shoulders. He was 16, just a boy forced to live inside a war. One evening, I left a letter where I knew Clara would find it. It was folded neatly on the kitchen counter, the paper deliberately aged, the ink smudged just enough to look real. The contents were simple, a fake confession I'd written. If anything happens to me, the police should know that Clara might not be responsible. I've grown forgetful. Perhaps my death will just be nature's mercy. A calculated piece of bait. Within an hour, she had opened it, read it, and hidden it under the drawer. She thought she was clever, that she could use my fake confession later. That's when I knew she was planning another attempt. Days passed. I made no move. Then came the night that changed everything. It was raining, the kind of rain that drowns all sound, steady, endless, cleansing. I was in my room reading when I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Too soft for Daniel, too hesitant for a mother checking on her son. I slipped the book aside and waited. The door creaked open, just an inch. Through the slit, I saw her silhouette holding a tray. Tea, always tea. I pretended to sleep. The tray clinked as she placed it beside the bed. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Good night, Margaret." And for a moment, I thought I heard satisfaction in her voice. When she left, I sat up. The tea smelled faintly of almonds, bitter, artificial, arsenic. She wasn't subtle anymore. She thought she'd already won. I didn't drink it. I didn't throw it away either. Instead, I poured a small amount into a sealed jar, tucked it inside my sewing kit, and made myself another cup of tea from my own stash. Then I waited. The next morning, Daniel came into the kitchen looking pale. Mom said you weren't feeling well. I smiled. Oh, I'm fine, dear. Just tired. Clara walked in behind him, holding that same fake warmth. She asked if I wanted her to call the doctor. I said no. I'd already made an appointment for the next day. That wiped the smile from her face. The doctor was my old friend Harold, a retired chemist who owed me a favor. He ran the contents of that jar through his home lab equipment. The results came back within hours. Arsenic confirmed. I finally had proof. But I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Because a woman like Clara doesn't just need to be punished. She needs to fall apart from within. I began my counterplay. It started with small things. Shadows in the hall. Misplaced objects. Subtle movements. I'd move her keys from the counter to the pantry. Unplug the nightlight in the hallway. Leave the basement door slightly open. Tiny disturbances. Just enough to make her doubt herself. Then I began whispering Daniel's name when I knew she was nearby, softly, as if I were speaking to a ghost. He knows, Clara. He knows what you did. She'd freeze in the doorway, eyes wide, and I'd smile, calm, collected, gentle. Within a week, she'd stop sleeping. She looked haunted, frayed. Daniel noticed the change. Grandma, what's wrong with Mom? I told him the truth, almost. Guilt has a way of showing itself, Daniel. Some people can't hide it forever. He didn't ask more. He was too afraid of the answer. Then, one night, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Her hands trembled. When she looked up at me, her eyes were hollow. I think someone's watching me, she whispered. In this house. I tilted my head. Why would anyone watch you, Clara? She broke then, sobbing, incoherent. All that pride and malice melted into raw panic. And I thought, good. Let her feel the weight of her own conscience. But fate, as always, wasn't finished with us. A few days later, Daniel came home early from school. He went to Clara's room to tell her and found her collapsed on the floor. The police said it was a heart attack. I knew better. On her nightstand was the letter I'd written. My fake confession. She'd been clutching it. For the first time, I felt something almost like pity. She'd destroyed herself trying to destroy me. But here's the thing about guilt. It doesn't die with the guilty. After her funeral, Daniel found a box hidden behind the false panel in her closet. Inside were letters, receipts, proof of her affair, of the debts, of the blackmail she'd used to trap my son. And at the bottom, a small vial, half full, labeled with my name. That night, Daniel and I sat by the fire in silence. He looked at me, his face pale, and said, Grandma, did you ever forgive her? I took a long breath, staring into the flames. Forgiveness isn't for people like her, Daniel. It's for people like us, so we can sleep at night. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't fully understand. Not yet. Maybe someday he would. But even now, years later, sometimes when I make tea, I catch that faint scent of almonds. And I wonder, did I really win? Or did I just become what she wanted me to be? The night of the family dinner still hums in my memory, like the low thrum of a violin string. Everything, the scent of rosemary and roast chicken, the clinking of plates, even the yellow wash of the dining room light, feels sharper now that I know what it meant. Daniel sat to my left, his shoulders squared but stiff. Across from us, Emily smiled that fixed smile she uses when she's already decided how the evening will end. She didn't know I'd already filed the papers. She didn't know the house she coveted was no longer hers to inherit. I cleared my throat. Before we eat, I said, there's something we need to discuss. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. Can it wait until after dinner? No, I answered. It can't. Daniel's eyes darted between us. You remember that deed you had me sign last year, Emily? The one you said was for insurance? Her smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened around the fork. Of course. It wasn't insurance. It was the transfer of this house into your name. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I found out, I continued, 2 months ago. I reversed it. Legally. Every document, every forged signature, it's undone. The silence that followed was almost merciful. The clock ticked once, twice. Daniel's breath sounded too loud. You, Emily began, voice trembling. You can't. I can. And I did. She pushed her chair back so suddenly it screeched across the floor. You've always hated me, Margaret. You never thought I was good enough for your son. You think you can take everything from me? I'm taking back what's mine. Nothing more. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd throw the wine glass in her hand. But she only stood there, breathing hard, her eyes darting toward Daniel as if he might defend her. He didn't. He just looked down. Ashamed, so I thought. That's when I slid the envelope across the table. These are your eviction papers. You have 30 days to leave. Her laugh was short, brittle. Eviction? From my own home? It was never yours. She stared at me, hatred sharp enough to cut. Then she turned, snatched her purse, and left without another word. The front door slammed like a final gavel. I remember the quiet that followed, the kind that buzzes inside your ears. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. Daniel reached for my hand. You did the right thing, Gran. His voice was soft, almost too soft. She deserved it. I nodded, squeezing his fingers. I only wanted peace. For a week, that peace held. Emily moved into a rented flat. The lawyers called it a clean resolution. Neighbors whispered, but politely. And Daniel stayed with me, said he didn't want me alone. At first, it was comforting. He'd make tea every morning, mow the lawn, even fix the loose hinge on the back gate. But sometimes, when I passed his room at night, I'd see the faint blue glow of his phone and hear his low voice, urgent, secretive. I told myself it was harmless. After all, he'd saved my life that night. If he hadn't switched the plates, I might not be here. Gratitude can be a blindfold. One afternoon, while dusting the study, I found an envelope under a stack of old letters. My name was on it, in Daniel's handwriting. Inside were photocopies of my bank statements, and beneath them, a letter addressed to his mother. Mom, once she signs everything over, we'll finally be free. She'll think it's her idea. Just act surprised when it happens. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I sat down hard on the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. He'd planned it. Not just Emily, Daniel too. Memories rearranged themselves in my mind like a piece of a cruel puzzle. The night he insisted on serving the soup, the way he'd known exactly which envelope to hand the lawyer, the eagerness with which he'd moved back in. None of it was coincidence. When he came home that evening, I was waiting at the kitchen table, the letter before me. Gran, he said, smiling. Everything okay? Sit down, Daniel. He frowned, but obeyed. His eyes fell on the letter. The smile dissolved. Where did you get that? From your drawer? You were smooping. I was cleaning. Silence stretched between us. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous tic he's had since childhood. It wasn't what it looks like, he said finally. Then tell me what it is. He swallowed. Mum wanted the house. I just wanted to make sure she didn't hurt you. I leaned forward. So you helped her forge documents? You called that protection? He changed my mind, he burst out. That's why I switched the plates. I stopped her, didn't I? His words hung in the air, desperate and pleading. For a moment, I almost believed him, until he looked away and added, but you were never supposed to find that letter. That's when the truth came. Sharp and undeniable. You were playing both sides, I whispered, making sure whoever won, you'd still have the house. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Outside, the first autumn rain began to fall, soft against the windows. The sound filled the silence between us, and I realized I'd lost them both. Not just Emily, but the boy I'd raised, the child who once picked wildflowers from me and left them on the porch. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said, voice cracking. I just wanted security. You always said families should look out for each other. And what do you think this is? I asked quietly. Looking out for me? He looked up, eyes glistening. I'm sorry. I believed him, and that, somehow, hurt more than the betrayal itself. The next morning, I called my lawyer again. We added an addendum to the will, one that placed the house in a charitable trust. No one in the family would inherit it. Not Emily, not Daniel. It was the only way to break the pattern. When I told him, he didn't argue. He just nodded, packed his things, and left. The sound of his footsteps fading down the hall was the last echo of the family I once knew. Days later, I found a small box on the porch. Inside was my wedding ring, polished and gleaming, and a note in Daniel's handwriting. I'm sorry I took this. I thought it might help me remember him. I hope one day you'll forgive me. I placed the ring back on Max's finger. It felt heavier than before, like it carried every secret we'd ever buried. That night, as the wind rattled the windows, I sat by the fire and let the quiet fill me. People think poison always comes in a bottle, but sometimes it's a smile, a promise, or a hand you've trusted your whole life. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. And peace, it seems, comes only after everything else has burned away. The kettle whistles softly in my kitchen now. I make 1 cup of tea, not 2. I still set the extra place, sometimes out of habit, but I don't wait for anyone to fill it. If you were in my place, if someone you loved betrayed you for a handful of comfort, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading.